Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar brought to you by the Canadian Professional Sales Association and sponsored by BrokerLink Insurance. Today's webinar will be on top tips for building a successful sales compensation plan brought to you by the Canadian Professional Sales Association and BrokerLink Insurance. CPSA members qualify for exclusive discounted insurance rates on home, car, and business insurance with Cornerstone BrokerLink. Through this group insurance plan, CPSA members can benefit from complete coverage, outstanding service, and a home, car, and business insurance plan that is tailored to meet the needs of members. Please note that you've been placed on mute for the duration of this webinar, and you may ask questions during the Q&A session using the Ask Question function in your GoToWebinar dashboard. Hosting today's webinar is David Johnston, President of Sales Resource Group. David has an extensive background in sales compensation audit and design. David has over 20 years of consulting experience designing plans for organizations in diverse fields such as print and broadcast media, pharmaceuticals, telecommunications, information technology, retail, manufacturing, and financial services. David works with clients primarily in sales compensation design projects. He has designed plans for all types of direct, indirect, channel management, call center, and inside sales roles. He has managed multidisciplinary teams on large-scale projects, worked with small sales and management teams, and is a sought-after speaker on sales compensation effectiveness. He teaches sales compensation for World at Work and is a member of the CPSA. Now, without further ado, I'll hand it over to David to start.
Thanks, Riplan. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We've just had we've got a bit of an issue, Riplan. I can't see the materials.
You just have to open it.
Yeah, there we go. All right. Okay, so as everybody is trying to get 2018 closed, from a sales perspective, it helps us to start to look at 2019 and we need to do to move from where we are to where we want to be next year. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through two aspects of determining the current and the future state that you're after. The first is to look at what's changing. And today, the roles and the structure of sales is undergoing some change, and we'll talk about that. We'll look at some of the processes and resource allocation changes that are taking place, customer buying patterns that are all, and finally, we'll look at performance and market data and information and how that's impacting all of these changes. Then we'll look at some key areas for you to focus on and look at the impact on sales compensation for those. So we'll look at research and how to establish some performance segment targets, as well as determining the kinds of measures that we want to use, business alignment and growth metrics that we're seeing in the marketplace, sales performance expectations, both qualitative and quantitative, and ensuring that people see opportunity and there's enough flexibility in your plan that you can address different situations. And finally, the last two will be discounting and plan qualifiers, as well as looking at where there's an opportunity in management compensation from a sales perspective. So what's changing with the roles? I have been working in sales compensation now for, actually it's closer to 30 years. And what I've been noticing in the last few years is the reduction in the number of salespeople and fewer feet on the street. Organizations are moving more towards using small to medium-sized customers, servicing them using inside sales or online sales. And they're making decisions around the cost associated with that face-to-face selling and what types of accounts warrant that kind of attention. A second thing that's changing in terms of structure is the proliferation in sales channels. So when you look at your structure, you need to ensure that if you're going to sell through a channel, that you can get enough coverage that it makes worth investing in that channel. And there's a variety of channels, everything from third-party selling to outsourcing to, using organizations that you partner with in order to address certain specific channels. As I said, inside sales is replacing some of the field sales. This is highly driven by cost control. And what we are finding, though, is that the inside salespeople are very effective at dealing with customers, not just from an issue management standpoint, but also in terms of identifying needs. And customers are quite willing to do it over the phone or online. Accounts and territories are starting to become more and more assigned based on cost effectiveness and the ability to influence results. So these are some of the things that we're seeing in terms of structure and roles that are changing that you need to take into account when you start to look at what changes you want to make in your organizations for 2019. So some tips: review the sales roles, make sure that the structure and the coverage is there. Optimize your sales territories to align with sales potential, and make sure that employees can see opportunity, that there's enough, when you're looking at the territory structure, make sure that employees can see enough opportunity and that there's clarity around expectations of what you want them to deliver. The second tip is to conduct a cost analysis to determine what is the ROCI, the return on compensation investment. Most organizations that I've been working with and that I've discussed this issue with is it's a zero-sum game. I don't see anybody increasing budgets for sales compensation, but what they are doing is they're maintaining the same budget but changing the allocation and looking at where they can put their compensation to be more effective and to provide better motivation and retention. Third, assess the sales thresholds for inside versus outside sales to make sure that you have efficient resource allocation and that you're not spending a lot of face-to-face time on customers that can be sold to adequately or efficiently through an inside sales representative. So what are some of the processes that are changing? For one thing, sales consultants are replacing sales reps. By that, what we mean is, in the past, sales reps would be given, their samples, their materials, and as long as they were hitting targets, the company was happy. What we're starting to see is that it's not just about product knowledge and going out to meet with customers and developing relationships. The sales role is becoming much more consultative in the sense of understanding the business and being able to analyze the business to determine what the needs of the customer are. And as a result, that's different competencies than in the past. Product knowledge, while it's important, you can bring a specialist in, a technical specialist, to support the sales consultant, but the sales consultant really needs to be able to analyze, develop creative solutions, and present them in a compelling way. For larger customer focus, what we're finding is this is, as you start to take away some of the smaller accounts and you're focusing on larger customer opportunities, they require more of a custom account approach. So this is where social selling or partnership selling comes in, and it becomes less about flogging product and more about being able to develop a business-to-business relationship where your knowledge and understanding of the customer is much deeper and richer than it would have had to be in the past to just sell to them. Multi-channel models are also required. And when you have these multi-channel models, you have to have different measures to be able to address the fragmentation of the sales role. So or the sales channels rather. So when you're looking at your compensation, in the past, if you used common measures for all of your channels, just a simple commission, or if you're using bonus measures, and in some cases now, you're going to find that you may need to use a different type of measure. So, for example, if you're in a technology business and you're selling software, in the past you would have sold licenses and service contracts. Whereas today, most of the software that's being sold is being sold on a SaaS basis, and you're having to look at measures such as monthly recurring revenue, or looking at a combination of contracts and monthly recurring revenue. We're also seeing a big focus on retention in sales compensation as well as new business. We'll talk about that in a little bit. You also want, we're seeing decisions made regarding sales and cost to manage. For the first time in the last, I would say, 3 to 5 years, I've started seeing sales organizations who were firing customers, essentially saying, we're going to price this business so that if we get it, from a cost to manage standpoint, it's worth taking it. Largely, these are issues around processes, customer requiring specific processes that can oftentimes be costly. But what we're finding is when you start to look at some of these, the cost to manage them is almost as much as the margin and profitability that's in them. So what are some of the tips? Identify competencies that influence your sales results. So look at the competencies that are really important in salespeople, especially in larger or B2B type selling situations. You're looking at more consulting type skills, analytical skills, creative capabilities, and as well as what you normally would be looking for in terms of good presentation and relationship management. Assess your measures. Is commission versus bonus. When you're starting to look at the life cycle of your company, if it's a startup type organization or it's in high growth mode, then likely commission is something that you want to look at, because that's a production driven measure and it tends to be more motivational and drive sales results. Bonuses, however, as you start to move forward and you start to capture market share, what you will find is that there's increased competition, margins get tighter, and the ability to offer high commission type plans needs to be modified versus achievement of targets through the use of bonuses. And you want that to be meaningful to your sales processes and customer requirements. So you also need to look at the kinds of transactions that you have with your customers. If it's highly transactional, if you have some sort of a product that's hard to differentiate and it's driven mostly by cost, that's a different type of commission plan than something that's more collaborative, working with the customer, or complex technical sales where there's a lot of people other than the salesperson that have to be involved in the development of the solution. You also should review your account segmentation to look at the cost effectiveness of the account in terms of from a sales and a servicing perspective, and make sure that the margins that are attached to those accounts are consistent with the effort and the costs that you incur in terms of managing them. Buying patterns are also changing. Customers don't want products. Today, they're looking for answers. They've got issues. They've got problems. They've got something specific. They've probably done their homework already online to identify some of their requirements and investigate the market opportunities of the potential suppliers. So they're looking for solutions, which means that you can't just present your product. You've got to clearly understand what they need and be able to present the solution in a way that's compelling. We're also seeing a lot of RFPs being driven at a much lower level. It used to be, if it was a very significant project, it might be sent to RFP. But today, a lot of organizations are using very low thresholds. I've even seen them as low as $10,000, where the supply chain influence is making it critical that you understand how to either get around the RFP process or to manage it a cost-effective way. The other thing that's changing is the people that are buying. We're getting a lot more millennial buyers as decision makers. They are different. They have high expectations. They want it all. They want you to provide everything, and they want it done very cheaply. They are not understanding when it comes to things like longer-term relationships, being able to provide strong service. They want a lot of stuff bought online. They also want to make sure that if there are any quality issues, etc., that you're responsive. So what are the tips for some of these buying patterns? Look at introducing some form of business planning process as a measure or a qualifier for larger accounts. We are seeing the ability to get around RFPs where the business planning is done as a collaborative team with the customer. Or at the very least, when you're doing that business planning with the customer, they will tell you what are the critical elements in the RFP that will assist you in terms of perhaps developing a creative competitive advantage. Also, create a structure to address different buying approaches. We're starting to see a lot more RFP teams that are multidisciplinary teams with finance, sales, service, etc. And these teams are being put together to provide not just the boilerplate that goes into RFPs, but also to be able to do a lot of analysis to determine what are some of the levers that you can pull in order to be successful with your RFP. Performance and market data. We have an explosion of data available to sales organizations today. Information about customers, products, activities, accounts. We're capturing a lot of information in CRM systems, in our contract information that goes into the warehouse and is available through business intelligence. A lot of it isn't formatted to support decision making, so that becomes an issue to ensure that when you're capturing this information, you understand how you're going to use it. Complexity as well, and the account assignments often change, the results in terms of who owns an account, who works on an account, how commission splits would be credited, etc. A lot of these activities that are a result of changes that take place in the organization, you need to make sure that those things are documented well and are captured so that when it comes to making a decision about who gets credit for the sale and or if it's split, what the split is, these things cause problems if they're not resolved in advance. The market economics are improving. Market compensation data is changing, and it needs to be reviewed. So when you're looking at the kinds of roles that are out there, what we are noticing is even though the numbers of feet on the street have gone down, our demographics are changing as well. There are fewer people going into sales roles. Some of them have ethnic requirements. Some of them have requirements around the kinds of knowledge that are required in order to address the sales. And as a result, the supply of qualified, skilled salespeople is diminishing. And as supply diminishes and demand increases, price goes up. So you need to make sure that you're looking at the market compensation for your organization. CRM systems are being used much, much more not just to capture customer information, but for pipeline management. But what we're finding is a lot of these systems have minimal compliance by salespeople. So they're putting in the minimum amount if they put it in at all, or if they can find a way around not having to do all the administration. They still are not seeing it as a critical tool, at least not, some of them aren't. You need complete information to support the actions as well as the sales compensation plan administration, in particular if you want to use qualitative or process-driven qualifiers in your plan. So what are some of the tips around performance and market data? Administrative policies should include some sort of requirement that in order to be eligible for commission or sales credit, that there has to be compliance with input of the accurate and complete information regarding the account, as well as any opportunities. So if somebody comes with a sale and there's no ownership in the CRM system, there's no documentation, it doesn't qualify for sales compensation. You will find this changes behavior dramatically. The other thing is to review some of your compensation measures and your market data. And I actually just did a review of the CPSA compensation survey, and there's some great information in there that I think will help in terms of identifying what you need to be paying for certain kinds of sales roles and how the market has changed for those roles over the last year. Also assess data availability in terms of accuracy and consistency in your ability to measure performance. A lot of organizations are trying to include that qualitative aspect, and they're finding it, once they put it into the plan and they start to measure it, it's not accurate or consistent, and as a result, they end up paying out at the end of the year, even though there may be really broad differences in performance of their salespeople, but they can't measure it that accurately. So let's move on to some areas of focus and how it's impacting sales compensation. So I mentioned up front, establish performance segments, set achievable targets, and assess measures. So one of the things that we're finding in the research is the top 20% are always the top 20%. They are people who are really good salespeople. They understand the market. They know how to sell to your customers. They replicate. They don't drop out of that top 20% too often. The bottom 20% are not likely to meet expectations. They're there for a reason. They're either in the wrong role. They're not happy with their situation. They accepted a job that they're not really good at. What we found is, on average, the fertile ground for sales compensation is the middle 60%. And when we look at performance improvement through the use of compensation, the research has shown that you're able to achieve somewhere around a 5 to 10% improvement. And if you can get 5 to 10% improvement on that middle 60%, you're going to have a very happy employer. Top-down target setting is required to meet the company's goals, but be careful. What we're seeing a lot of is padding or contingencies that are put in not just at one level, but at multiple levels. And by the time it gets to the salesperson, what seems to be stretched is really unachievable. And in fact, in some cases, targets are being set that salespeople haven't been able to achieve in the past. So you've got to make realistic targets. Otherwise, it's not an incentive program. It's probably a downer. Measures need to reflect the type of sales. So when you're looking at low margin transactional sales, as I said before, commission is probably the way to go. As sales cycles in larger sales, and we're starting to see a lot of what we call mega deals out there now, where the size of the opportunity represents a significant proportion of the annual target. In these long sales cycles, you need to look at some form of bonus or milestone payments to ensure that people are focused on the right things and not trying to close a long sales cycle because they need commission. So what are some of the tips? The other thing that we found with our research is that plans that are based on solid research and investigation do much, much better than those that are hastily put together at the end of the year so that the company has something to announce for the next year. I've had VPs of sales that have said to me, can't we just sit down in a room for a couple of hours one afternoon and hash this out so that we know what we need to do for next year? And yes, you can. You can get in, you can look at new products and services, etc., and tweak the commission rates, but you'll never know whether or not you've been able to achieve the best out of your plan. So what kind of research do you need to do? Well, you should be looking at your sales performance distribution. What has been the percentage of quota achieved by your salespeople? What does that distribution look like? Is it a normal distribution? Is it the typical sales distribution is normal, that is slightly skewed to the right for modest overachievement? We are also, by the way, with millennial salespeople, we're starting to see bimodal distributions. One group at the top that is very motivated, very focused, very driven, and performing at a high level. And then another group that is at the lower end, not performing well, still have very high expectations. They want it given to them. They're complaining because they don't think the plan is the right plan. But that other group is performing very well. So when you're looking at sales performance, it's important to look at what your people have been doing over the last year to make good business decisions about things like quota, as well as looking at the people that should be retained. Pardon me. We also want to look at performance and reward linkage. So start looking at the distribution of performance and payout. So when we look at the line, there should be a very distinct relationship between achievement against quota and the amount of incentive opportunity that's been achieved. If you do that graphing and you start to see a lot of outliers or the distribution isn't strong, what it's basically saying is you don't have a good linkage between the performance of your people and the way that the comp plan rewards them. Another thing is to look at sales trend analysis. There's a whole range of things that you can look at. Some of the more common ones are look at product trends and new product introduction in terms of the sales trends. Look regionally to see if there are areas of focus across your geography that are more productive than others, and maybe you should focus more resources on. And then looking at different sales channels. We found that the indirect sales channel has really skyrocketed in terms of amount of investment in that channel. And then next, look at payout frequency. Are there trends that we see in terms of payouts? And you should be looking for things like cycling, where people achieve in quarter one, they don't achieve in quarter two, they overachieve in quarter three, and then they don't achieve in quarter four and the annual target. What this means is they are gaming the system and they're withholding orders in order to maximize the payouts that they get. The comp plan can't stop that, but when you do the research, it becomes something that management needs to be more proactive in terms of making sure that salespeople know that you're not going to stand for this, and that they should be aware that if there's a perception that that's happening, there'll be a lot more scrutiny on their activities. As I said, focus on the middle 60%. That's where comp is going to give you the best influence. And finally, the last tip in this section is invest in some multidisciplinary target setting. So, you know, you need people that understand what's going on inside the business, and that may include folks in finance, sales operations, marketing, as well as sales, to look at historical sales over the last 12 months, use some sort of predictive sales information, looking internally as well as the market, as well as product sales in the market. Look at competitive information. How have your competitors been doing in the marketplace? Having a 10% increase in sales, you know, isn't very satisfying if you find out that your competitors are growing by 30%. And finally, look at any sort of seasonal or promotional timing to make sure that when you're setting your targets and you're assessing the things that you want to measure, or you're creating spiffs, that you're putting them in the areas where you're going to get the most return on that investment. So business alignment and growth metrics. Here's some of the findings. You know, to achieve growth, you know, in the past, we focused on new business, but what we're finding now is that there's less loyalty among customers. So to achieve growth, you have to have the incremental new business sales or new product sales, but you've got to have retention. And retention is often overlooked in the sales compensation plan when we tend to just look at the overall number and not on whether it's coming in from new business or it's coming in, it's existing account revenue or margin. So to align sales compensation to the goals of the business, you also need to align some of the other elements that go into that achievement of those goals. So you need to start first with the business goals and then look at the strategies, the sales, marketing, and service strategies that you're going to employ in order to execute on those goals. You then need to look at your tactics. So if I'm looking for growth, what kinds of behaviors and activities am I looking for from my sales force in order to achieve that growth? One of the things that tends to get left out when you're planning for the next year is to review the roles and responsibilities. We tend to look at the market and we tend to look at our products and our sales, but we never really take a step back and say, is this role structured properly? Is it accountable for the things that are going to make us successful? Has the role changed? If it's changed, how has it changed? Because if you don't update these things on a regular basis and make sure that you know what you're looking for out of a particular sales role, you might be reinforcing an old paradigm through your comp plan. So finally, once you know that the structure is correct for the roles and responsibilities, we then need to identify within those roles what are some of the key performance metrics that we need to use. How will we know if those salespeople are delivering what we need them to deliver? Finally, some of the key elements in achievement of growth are new business and new logos. So we want new business opportunities, and we want to make sure that if we're paying for those, that they have the potential to warrant us paying more for that new business. The other thing is, in today's more competitive environment, a couple of things are really important elements. Number one, you need to have target achievement. If you're, especially as your business matures, in order to fund operations going forward, you will need to achieve targets. What you don't want are salespeople that are achieving 90% of targets, and as a business, they're happy with 90% of their compensation, and but your business isn't achieving its goals. Secondly, we want to make target achievement meaningful. So what I am seeing is organizations that are taking, for example, if they're paying a quarterly bonus, they actually split the bonus budget into 5, and they pay out 4/5 of it, 1 in each quarter, and then they hold the 5th component to the end of the year as a target achievement bonus. And it also mitigates any risk if you've paid over achievement in one quarter and they don't achieve their overall target. And finally, accelerators. You need to look at accelerators for overachievement and make sure that they are consistent with what you want to pay people for, and they focus on the right things. So what are some of the tips? In order to identify that alignment, you need to conduct executive interviews to identify the direction of the business. Hold a financial session. Bring the financial people and the sales people and the operations people together so that you look at the business performance metrics and you align those with what you're doing with your sales comp plan. Talk to the field. Do a survey, do a focus group. You need to have their input in order to get their buy-in. If you just set targets without any input from the field, they're your targets, not theirs. And finally, you need that executive presentation at the end that actually demonstrates that you've done your homework to get that approval to proceed. We're recommending that you create separate sales retention metrics as a second measure, or shift to a net sales metric in order to ensure that you're getting the focus both on new business development as well as retention and growth of the existing accounts. Modifiers, by the way, are an effective technique to reward for new business. So the sales credit or the commission rates multiplied by, for example, 1.2 if it's a new account or a new logo, or where you're trying to link two measures together in order to maximize your profitability. So you might pay out based on volume and then have a separate measure that modifies that volume commission payout based on margin. Performance expectations. Target achievement is essential for company success, but too often the measures pay out for actual sales achieved, as I said before, and the company misses its goals. So you've got to make sure that target achievement is a critical element. Cost control has been limiting the additional funds for sales comp. So what we need to do is identify where we want to place our incentive compensation, our variable pay. And the two key qualifiers there are, number one, your plan should tell salespeople what you value. So if I value new business more than existing business, then I need to make sure that my incentive compensation plan pays more for new business than it does for an existing account. On top of that, if there's new products that you're introducing and you want to create a focus on that, then there should be some sort of a spiff or some sort of a multiplier that's based on sales of that new product versus other ones. To be successful, the salesperson has to see opportunity. We are seeing a lot of organizational change. We're seeing a lot of compensation change. But at the end of the day, if salespeople do not see opportunity, they're not going to be motivated. One size does not fit all. There has to be some flexibility. There are going to be situations where you need to either have a hybrid plan or you need to have a plan that has flexibility in it to fit certain situations that only exist in one marketplace. So the tips for that: build in a strategic initiative, some sort of MBO that has both qualitative and quantitative, or a revolving measure. So each quarter you have a focused product that gives you flexibility for things that can change as the plan year goes on or as you introduce new products and services. Communicate target total compensation for the role. You want to set performance expectations for salespeople. If you say to them, you're going to be paid $50,000 and you can earn 20% of your base, they will see the job as $50,000 and whatever I sell, you pay me for. You want to set expectations. You want people to know that this is a $100,000 job, of which 70% is base salary and 30% is incentive. And if you're only earning 25% of that, you're underperforming. And finally, allocate some of the incentive component for target achievement, as I said. Do something that makes that milestone meaningful. Discounting. I just want to check my time here. I've got another 4 or 5 minutes. Where sales reps have the ability to discount, there needs to be consequences, both positive or negative. Where there's no discounting, the role is more driven by volume, and then commission or volume-driven bonuses are a more desirable component. Qualifiers set performance expectations to ensure that we get the right kind of behavior and focus. So if you've got a low margin product that's easy to sell, cap it until higher margin products are sold or thresholds at least are reached, and that way you get more balanced selling. So the tips for this are to try and link margin or net sales to the volume production measure. Very often we drive volume and we look for incremental sales, but we want to make sure that we have margin tied into that. I always like to put salespeople in situations where they get to make better decisions and they earn more, or they make poor decisions and they earn less. If you're not getting the customer-focused qualitative elements, that's where you need to introduce some sort of a qualifier or a modifier that shows evidence of payout. So, for example, if you want them to follow a methodology, then have some sort of a modifier that says, if we review the sale and you haven't used the methodology, then there's a 0.9 modifier. You'll start to see people that will start complying with what you need them to do from a behavior standpoint. And set thresholds to establish performance expectations and to replace non-performers. We tend to be allowing people that aren't performing to stay in organizations much too long. If they're not performing, you should be like good coaches on sports teams. You should always be looking to improve your bench and get better quality, in particular at the bottom end. And finally, management compensation. We've re-engineered most of the potential for productivity improvement out of our sales rep comp. The same can't be said for sales management. There's a huge opportunity here for focusing on what we want our sales management to do and how we want to reward them. So managers need to be rewarded for coaching and mentoring, but not the activity, but the sales result that comes out of that performance improvement by individuals on their team. So for under management compensation, assess the role, make sure you have clarity around what you want your sales managers to do and that they know exactly what you want them to do. If they sell as well as manage, then they need to have that as a separate measure. There's a typo there. If they do not sell, then they should be held accountable for improvement in the sales rep performance. And finally, an alternate management comp plan metric could be tied to some sort of strategic development metric. So looking at market penetration or new product introduction, managers can be very effective at ensuring that salespeople focus on the right things. So in summary comments, research-based plans do better than those that are management-driven. Utilize a multifunctional group to make changes. Make sure all of the stakeholders are involved in the kinds of changes that you're going to make. Don't change too much, too often, or too little, or too late, because you want to make sure that you can manage the results that come out of the changes that you're making. Ensure that managers are on board, that they understand the plans, that they know what your expectations are. They are the linchpins to your success. And finally, keep in mind the impact that sales compensation changes have on people. Sometimes we look at these things from a theoretical standpoint, and we forget that they're actually impacting people's lives. So that's my presentation for today. I'm open to questions. Rupalin, I'll turn it back to you.
Sure thing. We do have a few minutes for questions. Please, audience, today, if you have any questions at all, use the question and answer function in your dashboard. You'll see it in the right bottom hand corner. So please feel free to type anything in, and we'll go ahead and answer them live. Just give it a minute there. Well, to be honest, I think you've covered it all, David.
All right. My information is there. I'm not the type of consultant that hits the clock when a person phones me. So if you have any questions or issues that you would like to raise with me, feel free to get in touch with me. And Rupalin, thank you, and thank CPSA for the opportunity to do this presentation.
Of course, thank you for providing your information there. So as David just said, please feel free to shoot David an email or a call here at the phone number and email address provided. Of course, David, thank you so much for taking part in today's webinar and for being such a wonderful host. For those of us who are still on the line here, if you'd like a recording of the webinar, it will be available in the CPSA Learning Hub to members after we air. So by the end of week, we will have that webinar up for you. If you have any questions about this webinar, please feel free to email me at salessuccess@cpsa.com, and I'd be glad to get back to you. Again, that's salessuccess@cpsa.com. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining.